Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this, of course, is No
No
Darkness
darkness.
But Ours.
Welcome to the second part of our deepest dive yet into the realm of underwater horror. You'll find a link to part 1 in the description below. Now put on your scuba gear and follow us into the depths. We were talking about this in the podcast we did about Terrified. I've spoken about it before. That little island, North Rona, off the Scottish coast, where essentially but I mean that's about nearly 50 miles from land in any direct. The nearest land is about 50 odd miles in any direction. You're not likely to be able to see it certainly on bad weather. So if you lived on that island and you've got this tiny little population clinging to existence on an island, and the rest of the world would basically seem to be empty.
Yeah.
Obviously, they knew there was an outside world. They had contact with it. But at the same time, an awful lot of the time, there was just absolutely no one else there.
Well, in terms of island horror, the two things I always think of are Skull Island, where King Kong comes from.
Oh, I've not seen that.
And I mean, both most recent versions, Kong Skull Island and the King Kong that Peter Jackman did, which, people like to shit on because it's 3 hours long. But I gotta say, the design elements that went into that fucking movie, it's like, yeah, Skull Island is like, well, we live in hell. Like, the people in Kong Skull Island, they're not living like a wonderful life, but they at least enjoy themselves. But yeah, the people in Jackman's version of Skull Island, particularly because, one of the things they had to cut out was that he redid the giant bug section that they cut out of the original King Kong.
Oh.
Yeah, in the original King Kong, there's this moment. It's a scene that they had to cut out because they weren't happy with the way it got done. It was stop motion, stuff like that. But also, people who saw the first cut of King Kong found it so horrifying that they were like, no, you have to cut that out. There is no fucking way that you can show that.
When you watch the original 1933 version of King Kong, how frightening it is. I mean, how gruesome it is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in both versions, there's this moment where the people who are going after, trying to rescue Fay Wray, Fay Wray's character, fall. There's a crevasse. There's a big crack, and they have to cross it. And they fall off the log that they're using to cross it, end up in the crevasse. At the bottom of the crevasse is a whole bunch of mulch, like I'd say a layer a mile deep. And living in the mulch, giant bugs. Giant bugs that want to eat you. Giant, all sorts of, it's like it suddenly turns into fucking Starship Troopers.
Wow.
With the brain bug,
With there are some great sort of supernatural horror novels set on the ocean. Like, I mean, Nancy Holder's Dead in the Water springs to mind.
Oh yeah, I love that book.
And the very underrated 1980 film Death Ship with George Kennedy.
It's this Nazi ship that is just like making this weird circumnavigation, waiting for people to, lose their ships and have to get on board their ship.
On board.
Yeah.
And it's Triangle, of course, Christopher Smith's film.
Yes. Which I have my own problems with, but mainly because of the autistic kid angle.
Of course, that would be. Sort of. That's not very well handled in that sense.
No, I mean, you often have to deal with autistic kids as some kind of plot device, obviously, but also, then it's like a weird kind of character thing, how people respond to having an autistic kid.
Yes.
And it I bounced hard off of that, but Christopher Young's amazing generally, and I know that a lot of people love Triangle, and I love the idea of the Bermuda Triangle, you know. Or fucking the Philadelphia Experiment.
Yes, another really good one.
Nick Cutter did something specifically for Audible, which takes a lot of its backstory from the Philadelphia Experiment, and his version of the Philadelphia Experiment is one of the most horrifying things that I've come across, because it's not just, it's not just we went from one time period to another, things started melting, somebody ended up inside a wall. We went from one dimension to another, and two dimensions intersected, and bits of one dimension got stuck inside another dimension. Just incredible.
Going into science fiction, I mean, it's interesting because, as I was saying, you get supernaturally stuff, as in, in this, you've got like things like films like Dead in the Water, which I think, superb. I haven't read that in years, but the fact I think I haven't read it since the late 90s, and the fact that it's I still remember that. It's very much in my head.
Well, the same way that the Fog has those elements of, they seem to be pirates, but they're actually lepers. Actually just sailors, just really pissed off sailors.
Understandably so. But in a lot of cases, so much maritime horror, so much undersea horror is more rooted in some kind of science fictional element than in a traditional supernatural one. That it does
another way that Cutter came across this was to so basically the deep, there's a place at the very bottom of the sea, like in the Marianas Trench, something along those lines. Yeah. Sorry?
The Challenger Deep?
Yeah, that's right. The Challenger Deep. So down so far that the only thing you can see is blackness and a falling gray layer of biological fall. It's like, it looks like ash, but it's actually, garbage from things eating other things, and decayed bodies and stuff like that. But by the time it gets down to you, it's just debris. It's just like, it just looks like something burnt up there, and now there's this snow coming down. At the bottom, where you are so completely isolated, they're doing research on a virus that is going around the world, which causes people to basically lose the ability to make memories. They lose all their old memories, and then they lose the ability to make any memories, and then they just sort of sit down and stare at things until they die. And the reason for going down there to work on, deconstructing this virus and maybe, finding a cure is so that they can be as isolated as humanly possible, and control who goes in and who comes out as much as humanly possible. But it's also because it's fucking creepy. It's incredibly, incredibly creepy, and the isolation is part of it. So you have the psychological strain of the isolation, the psychological strain of being, in this this frenzy, this hot zone frenzy of trying to, come up with a cure for something that, it's like, maybe people are going to forget that we're down here, because everybody's forgetting everything, and we're going to fucking starve to death in the dark, let alone if we start forgetting that we're down here, and somebody just opens up a, porthole, lets the sea in. So all of that goes into the making of Nick Cutter's The Deep, but then there is also a potentially supernatural element.
Okay.
So, at that place where is it a hallucination, or are you actually being haunted by things that you have, traumas that you have memories about, etc.?
Yeah.
Is there evil in the world? Is there like evil with a personality, or is it big evil, or is it just little evil, or maybe just evil, as Uncle Stevie says. So
Yes. Yes.
or Sarah Lotz's Day 4,
Oh
which
yeah, that's a brilliant book. I mean, everything. I love Sarah Lotz's horror
God,
fiction. It's just fantastic.
absolutely. And this thing of, and it's like we've all heard those stories about how there's no law on the ocean, right? You
Yeah.
get past a certain point, and anybody can do any fucking thing, really, because, it's like maybe you've got somebody aboard your ship, particularly if it's a huge cruise ship, as this is. Maybe you've got a couple of, like you've got security, you've got like sort of like a police force inside your ship. But if
Yeah.
things start breaking down, you know, things start breaking down pretty quick, and it's like you're on a floating island. You're on a floating island where you're running out of everything.
Oh, now what's it called? Because I was sent a copy of this to try and find a blurb for. I didn't find the time for it, but it was a very good. It was by a Scandinavian author, and it was set on one of the ferries that goes from, I think, Britain to Scandinavia, and basically a vampire gets loose and starts
Oh, that is
and
great.
starts
I would.
spreading.
Is it? It's not Amakatsu.
No, not Alma Katsu. It was written by a guy.
Yeah, no, because that was the Deep, and that was about the not the Titanic, but the Britannic.
I need to read Alma Katsu. I
Yeah.
haven't read any of her stuff yet, I have to admit.
No, you absolutely do.
By the way, the book I was mentioning before, Blood Cruise by Matt Strandberg.
Blood Cruise.
The
Okay. Strandberg. Yes, I've got it here. Nice. Thank you very much. I'm downloading a sample now. There's a woman named Darcy Coates who did a really great underwater horror novel that I picked up on Kindle. And she doesn't always work for me, but this fucking worked so well for me. And it's literally called something like Down Below. Just one moment. Oh, not to mention, there are a lot of things based around the transition, the voyage that Dracula takes in Dracula.
Yeah.
The voyage of the
Demeter.
The Demeter, yes. The route of salt and ice, I think, is in it. Oh, From Below. It's called From Below. And it's about excavating a bunch of again, deep sea divers who are excavating and making a documentary about the excavation of a long lost ship in the Titanic mode, which went down in this particularly dead ass area of Arctic waters. It's not quite at the Arctic, but it's so cold that it makes it incredibly difficult to, and yet everything is beautifully preserved, obviously. So they go down there, and they've got all the survival horror stuff of, well, you might run out of air, and you have to keep checking yourself all the time, and you might go a little crazy, and going back up is going to take like an hour and a half. So you really got to check your time, and not just your air, but your time. And then once they get in there, they discover that the ship is haunted. And the reason that it went down is because of stuff which had to do with the haunting. It's an incredible book. So From Below by Darcy Coates is, you know, combines all the things I love about underwater horror, and water horror, and, you know, it's like sea horror, you know. Yeah, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that, you know, when you talk about sea horror, you're not just talking about underneath the sea. You're talking about on the sea. You're talking about the weather that comes from the sea. You're talking about people who come from the sea. You're talking about piracy. You're talking about, you know, lack of laws. You're talking about when the horizon is all you see, there's no fucking land anywhere. The craziness that comes to you when you're in the middle of what seems like just a planet of water. Just there's nothing there.
It's so much of it again is it's stripping away. It's going back to something we've talked about before, stripping away the sort of a lot of the kind of accoutrements, a lot of the additions of kind of civilization and that until you're left with increasingly with very little to measure yourself against in terms of constraints on your behavior, in terms of, you know,
and constraints on your mind as well. You know, it's like the more alone you are, the less you are checking in with other human beings, the more you become able to think thoughts that you would just go, no. And not just think them, but speak them and also act upon them.
Yes. Which is really worrying.
Yes, that's the super worrying thing, you know. And, you know, that's why the interesting juxtaposition in day 4 of like a luxury liner, you know, a cruise ship where everybody, you know, it's like, yeah, I want to be in the middle of nowhere on the ocean, but I want all the accoutrements of home. You know, I want all the, you know, in fact, I want it to be better than home. I want it to be luxurious. I want to pretend that I'm, you know, it's like, and pretty soon, you know, it's like you're at the bottom of the sea, you know, the ship's rolled over and you're having to climb through it. What's that? The Poseidon Adventure? Yeah. You know, like there's so many fucking things that can go wrong on the ocean. There's so many things that can go wrong on a body of water.
There was the Batavia, I think it was a Dutch ship that was wrecked, and one of the survivors, essentially some kind of crazed preacher type, set himself up as kind of like the king of the island, killed and cannibalized, and he was eventually kind of.
Let's return to Lovecraft for a second.
Yeah,
because there's a side bar, which I think we cannot possibly not pay attention to, which is submarine horror. And Lovecraft,
the temple.
Yeah, the temple. Yeah, Lovecraft, one of the first things that he wrote, I mean, you know, it's like we go from Dagon, which is above the water, but so, you know, obsessed with how horrifying the water is, how horrifying the sea is. You know, it's like somebody said quite rightly that, you know, the 3 things that he was afraid of more than anything else, aside from, you know, existential dread and the vastness of the universe, were people who weren't from New England, vaginas, and seafood. You know.
Didn't he once pay some muscular young guy to pick him up and basically carry him into the sea to
I haven't heard that. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, because he's not a dude who's you know, comfortable with the ocean in any way, shape, or form.
No.
And you know, so we know that there's this big part of Lovecraft where it's like, you know, people coming from the sea who breed with people on the land, and then they produce people who look like fish a little, and then they start to look like fish a lot, and then they go back in the sea, and they go back in the sea, you know, Yohanathle, and the Innsmouthians. But, you know, even well before that, you have these two stories, Dagon and the Temple, which are set during World War One.
And they're both flip sides of the same coin. One is the survivor of a ship sunk by the
by a U-boat. Yeah.
He sees the Huns had not yet sunk to their later level of barbarity and didn't, sort of like machine gun us all. And he ends up in there's some kind of subterranean upheaval, and he finds himself on this,
This
sort of,
island that's come from the bottom of from the sea, the bottom of the sea, brought up by a volcanic eruption or something like that. And he's
yeah,
like, why is everything so wet? And why is there no sand? And also, why are all these carvings everywhere? And then, it's like, oh God, things start coming up out of the ocean, and, fishy things,
yes,
with big buggy eyes, worshiping in front of these cyclopean, images. And
yeah,
then he realizes that in fact it's on the back of something gigantic that it's so gigantic that it has a fucking island on its back, and
yeah.
it just starts to dive, and he's like, well, that's the end of me. But then he survives, and a boat picks him up and brings him back to New York, where he just can't stop thinking about it, so eventually he kills himself.
My God, that hand! The window! The window! It's one of those unintentionally hilarious endings.
Yes, exactly. It's like, I gotta write this down real quick.
There's actually there's a Norse legend about a creature like a gigantic turtle, which people would mistake for an eye. I'm not sure if it would do this deliberately out of malice or simply because it was just kind of like cruising along, minding its own business, and people, we found a new island. Oh, I'm going down. What the fuck? Help! We're drowning. I mean,
the idea of the Kraken, which
yeah,
completely comes from the North Sea,
and
there are like a whole different bunch of Krakens, like a whole different bunch of and all of them do things that will tempt you to come towards them, and that so they can eat you.
yes, I mean, unintentional humour is in both of those stories. I mean, in the window endures, and the sort of the almost parodic, sort of characterization of the German officer in the tent, to the point where you just wonder why Lovecraft didn't just write all the W's as V's and the H as Z's.
My iron German will.
It's one of the
everyone else is freaking out, but I'm not going to freak out because of my iron German will.
It's pig dogs at one point is another phase that literally.
Yeah, no, he like refers to other German people as particular pig dogs. It's like, I'm an Austrian, of course, so
Despite all that,
these were Low Dutch, German pig dogs.
Despite that, I mean, despite this very heavy-handed characterization, and it's something that I think every writer has struggles with. At some time, they try to sort of, in an effort to make the story work, they kind of feel they have to stamp some kind of characterization onto it, rather than let it develop organically, and that can kind of stiffen the whole thing and not and make it maybe less good than it would have been. But despite all that, there is something truly haunting about this idea. This submarine, this U-boat that sinks a ship, and then it finds itself kind of cursed. Effectively, it's kind of like immobilized. It can't surface, and it's being borne along to this ancient sort of
this subterranean, this temple at the bottom of the sea, which it isn't even like part of Johannesburg. There's no huge city around it. It's just this fucking temple. It's like just going down further and further and further and further, getting the bends. Everything's dark, and we're running out of energy, and pretty soon there's no lights. And it is very much like getting trapped inside of inside of a ship that started to jump, and then it came out of a jump in the middle, in the gulf between the stars, right? And
it's something which I think I'd be really interested in seeing maybe the next series of Del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities.
I would love that.
To see because I mean, while that characterization is over the top, the idea of that narrator, that commanding officer, as this, sort of almost pathologically, fanatically dedicated individual that's what kind of keeps him sort of
Yeah.
keeps him firm or whatever, while everyone else is slowly going unhinged or is being seduced by whatever call is coming from the city.
Yeah. It's like, I'm gonna get into the the tubes we fire, torpedoes out of, and let myself out into the sea, and at a certain point, when the submarine has finally made it to the bottom, he just puts on his outfit and goes out.
Yeah, he's basically saying, even I can't resist the call. My iron German will has been worn down,
Yes, it's been worn down. So I'm just gonna walk over to the temple, see what's going on, hang out, until my lamps go out.
Yeah, and so you can see all these kind of you can point out all these flaws. They're very much very much sort of an early works by. And I think both of those stories have. They're often sort of dismissed as just being preliminary sketches for stuff that he would go on later to do. Like, I mean,
they're pulpy by Lovecraftian standards, but I gotta say they have.
There's still something in their own right. They have merit in their own right. There's a real there's an undeniable power both to Dagon and to the temple. And I think particularly in the case of the temple, the fact that this manages to transcend the voice that it's written in, which is, Lovecraft banging his drum of "you bloody Germans, I don't like you." In
terms of beach horror, one of Lovecraft's last things that he did was a collaboration with that one really young friend of his, who later went on to become an archaeologist.
I think I may be familiar with this one. I'm just trying to remember what it was called.
I'm trying to remember what it's called too. But yeah, I mean, it takes place on the beach, and there are these amazing descriptions of the kind of weather that comes off of the sea, and finding things on the beach and going like, is this a carved artifact or just a piece of coral that's being worn down that happens to weirdly look like a carved artifact? Is this a human hand that I found in the surf? Going back and forth. Messiah of Evil, which is a very odd, like almost Grindhouse level film, that manages to be superbly Lovecraftian in its tone, is, I believe, based on that. I may be wrong about it, but it's definitely based on Innsmouth. It has hints of Innsmouth, but it also really has the tone of that particular crazy story, that's a whole subset of ocean horror, which is beach horror.
And you can hear the third part of our talk on underwater horror here at the same time next week. No Darkness But Ours is made possible through generous donations from horror enthusiasts just like you. If you'd like to support us, you can sign up to our Patreon and get access to exclusive content, or you can make a one-off donation via Ko-Fi. Links in the description below. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know in the comments, share and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the like button if you're watching us on YouTube. Let us know as well if there's anything you'd really like to hear us talking about in the future, and we'll be back with more at the same time next week. So, until next time, I have been Simon Bestwick.
And I have been, as usual, Gemma Files, and this remains No Darkness But Ours.